It is my pleasure to introduce a special guest on Shabbat Night Live. Ryan Mauro is a national security analyst for the Clarion Project. He is a professor of counter-terrorism, and he is a regular Fox News contributor. His insight into the world of terrorism, Islamic terrorism specifically, has brought him into the forefront of world news and is able to bring to light so many things that the population of the world needs to know and understand at this point. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Mauro. Ryan,
Hi.
It is so good to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I have listened over just the last couple of days. I have listened to over 38 videos that were done that are on the Clarion Project website. These are interviews that you did, and I am encouraging everyone to dig into that. But I promised you that I was not going to say what I hear in all these interviews. Ryan, we have just a couple seconds left, and then give you a couple seconds to answer. Ladies and gentlemen, we're actually going to give him the floor in explaining so many of these things that he's given. Sometimes 3 minutes. The news media wants to isolate everything and get it into little sound bites, but we know that life is not a soundbite. And so I want you to be comfortable in laying out the facts as you see them. And again, I encourage people to go to the Clarion website and tell us a little bit about the Clarion Project and what that's all about, because you are a national security analyst with the Clarion Project. We know they're involved in a lot of things. Tell us about that.
Sure. So the Clarion Project is a nonprofit educational organization that studies Islamic extremism. In my own work with them, I'll also do some research into non-Islamic extremists as well, but Clarion Project specifically is geared towards combating Islamic extremism, and they've been around since 2006, 2007. Originally really made their mark by releasing documentaries like Obsession, The Third Jihad, Iranium, all which were widely distributed, all about the ideology of radical Islam, so people could understand why all of this was happening without it being politicized and without it being reduced into miniature sound bites. And over time, it grew from a filmmaking operation to having me as an analyst writing a lot of articles, going out into the media, training police, and now I have my own section of Clarion Project called the Clarion Intelligence Network, where we as civilians and then retired law enforcement professionals collaborate to try to fill the gaps in our national security apparatus. We study what are the type of things that police aren't allowed to do or that they're discouraged from doing, and to whatever way we're able to do so legally, we try to fill it for them and provide intelligence on terrorist activity, criminal activity to them so that we can help them get the information that they need, learn how to act on it, and understand what's going on right in their own backyards.
Now, we don't want to, any procedures and methods, we don't want to divulge that, but you are actually involved in counter-terrorism operations, covert operations. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, we'll do a lot of that ourselves. We do have undercover sources. We have Muslim sources in the Muslim community operating in areas that law enforcement needs more information to come out of, in some cases that they haven't been able to penetrate because it's just such a tight-knit radical Islamic community, and we have been contacted by Muslims that want to collaborate with us in trying to expose these evildoers. They have an experience that they become concerned about, and they look around and say, who do I feel comfortable with collaborating? And in some cases, it's us. So we do get undercover information, and then informally we'll talk to whatever agencies we need to better understand what we need to provide them with so that action can be taken, or in some cases there are creative things that we can do ourselves to try to inhibit the operations of those that want to do harm to the country.
Well, I know in Israel, and that's where I've lived for the last 20 years, is that there's so much information that is gained by collaborating with informants who are, in the category of Palestinians, but they're really Arabs, Muslims, and they are also exposing these things. So you are saying that there is in the United States, with the people that you're working with some of the insiders, that there is really a difference between the ideology of some Muslims and the radical Muslims, that they're not all in the same pocket, so to speak.
Right, there's a greater deal of diversity within, especially the Muslim American community, than is often appreciated, because the top leadership of the Muslim American community almost come from, I guess you'd say, the same tribe, ideologically speaking. They'll have links to the same overseas actors, they'll come from similar backgrounds, and so they largely speak with one voice, the individuals that you'll see in the media, those that are leading the community. But then the people that go to the mosques, those that are Muslim but don't go to mosque, they'll have different, more individualistic interpretations that often clash with that of their leaders. And so you'll have some radicals that don't like other radicals because they disagree over some details. You'll have some people that are moderate but not fully pro-American, and then you'll have some that are fully pro-American and feel like they don't have a voice. Because it's the guys that are causing conflict with the U.S. government, those are out there saying to destroy Israel, that have gotten the overseas funding for decades. And therefore, they have the ability to create offices, they have the resources to reach out to the media. And so for virtually every politician, whenever there's an issue related to Islam, they look in their Rolodex and they say, well, who is the most well-known spokesperson I need to collaborate with to get my information from? And it will usually be someone from one of these organizations that have been around for decades and decades. And why have they been around for decades and decades? Because they've gotten overseas funding from places like Saudi Arabia or Iran or Qatar, and that's very problematic. And so we do a lot of collaboration and give assistance to more progressive Muslim reformers that are more modern in their thinking and say, we've got a problem on our hands and we can't just blame the Jews all the time. We've got to re-examine essentially our belief system and bring it into the year 2018 and deal with this, because we're tired of the misery, we're tired of the failures, and we want to be productive citizens.
Well, last year at the Feast of Trumpets, we had Kamal Salim, who he was a Muslim, and he was trained and came over to America as an infiltrator. But because American Christians took care of him after a severe accident, they took care of him and ministered to him. He saw the love in that, and it really turned him around. He became a believer, and actually goes into some of the terrorist hotbeds in America, and is very verbal in speaking the truth to these Muslims. So we see that there are some that want the truth, and they're willing to step away from their religious background, especially the hardcore background, if they're confronted with some compassion and love, which sometimes it's hard for us to go there.
Right, and so that really is the most critical ingredient, even though we're not a proselytizing organization that I'm involved in, but I do come across a lot of stories of Muslims that will convert out of the faith, or even those that become moderate because they interact with Jews or Christians that show that love, and they say, look, what I've been taught is wrong. They don't have satanic horns on their heads. They're not as bad. They're not waging war on me like I've been taught. And that is really in terms of the ideological warfare. And then for Christians that do want to preach the faith, that is the single biggest ingredient. And I'll tell you what, here's something that I've never seen a media outlet really get into, except for some brief occasions where I've thrown it into one of my segments. When I look at the transcripts of wiretaps of terror suspects, especially the worst ones like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, you will see transcripts of the wiretaps sometimes put into court documents as evidence. Very few people read them. I enjoy reading them because I want to understand what they're saying when they don't know they're being recorded. And what you will see in the vast majority of cases, several moments where the jihadist is thinking about killing others and killing himself in the process. And what he's saying is, man, I've committed so much sin in my life. I've done so many bad things. Just the other day, I was drunk with my friends. I was out with a woman. I was doing these bad things, and I just want God to accept me, and I want to know I am going to heaven in the afterlife, and the only way I can be confident that my sin is wiped away is if I become a martyr in violent jihad. I can understand why most media outlets don't want to go there, but media outlets will often look at the things that they're talking about to try to find an explanation for why this happens. Who bullied them? Is it because they were out of a job? Is it because they grew up in poverty? They must be crazy. All these other explanations that statistically don't correlate with the problem. But when I look at the transcripts, I do see a correlation, and it's that type of thinking. There's a shame and understanding that they have sinned, and they're trying to wipe away that sin. And the only way offered to them is to die in violent jihad, killing other people and killing themselves.
Well, I'll tell you, that analysis right there is worth the pot of gold right there to understand that very thing. And this, we're offering, the believing world is offering an alternative to that. You're not going to go to heaven and be welcomed by 72 virgins or whatever the current number is because you are a martyr for Allah and you commit a crime. We've got another answer to that, and to hold that hope out, hold that truth out. That I think you just given me a key, because as I see the women, the burqas, and I see Muslims, it's hard for me to reach out to them. I don't know how to do it. Do I tell them about the Red Sea crossing? They know about that. Do I tell them about Mount Sinai in Arabia? Well, they know the mountain of Moses is in Arabia. I mean, they believe Moses, but yet their text, their Bible. It twists things. It doesn't introduce the real, or what Moses really said. In their Jesus, you might as well call him Stan Oliver or one of the Three Stooges. It's nothing related to what Yeshua did and what he said. And so with that, it's like, okay, now I can enter into the conversation with them and realize that there's another way. There's a hope. That we can hold out to them. Yeah, there are really two branches when it comes to discussing theology with Muslims, I find. There are those that aren't that into it. They are more focused on their own spiritual connection with God, which I believe is very, very real. We can't constrain God and say he's not going to reach out to someone just because he may not have the correct theology in our mind. And so I've been in the room with Muslim activists where I feel like God's doing something with them. So there are those that have that, and they're not really into the details of the theology. Then there are those that are into the detail of the theology, and they love talking about Moses, and they love talking about Jesus, because for them, Jesus is essentially number two below Muhammad. And they are proud of that because they see it as their faith is the one that can bring everyone together because, oh, well, you guys love Jesus, we love Jesus too. And they're eager to show that to you. So they'll do the talking for you in a lot of cases. But what we've just discussed is part of the reason why there is a trend overseas where they are becoming more strict adherence to Sharia law, which is the political application of the faith. When it goes beyond your relationship with God, and you say, no, all of this is a constitution that we are required to institute as a theocracy around the world, because they're struggling with their own internal sin. Every time that they commit a sin, the result is you get more radical. So there's that one trend. But then there's another trend, which is to open up to evangelical Christianity, and in some cases other faiths, but it's mostly evangelical Christianity, and then also some atheism as well is quickly growing within the Muslim world, because they just, especially in places like Iran, because the idea of religion at that point to them, they're not open to it because they've had such a bad experience. So the Middle East is rapidly changing, and you are seeing more broadly as a result of all those changes, a desire to open up to the West. And even Saudis I met when I went to Saudi Arabia were eagerly saying, you know what, soon there's going to be a church here, soon we're going to be part of the modernized world, and that was hope to them. You make a good point there, that the Quran really is the Constitution. And just like to the Christian and Jewish world, the Constitution of the Jewish and Christian world is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And of course, Yeshua and the Gospels is really unpacking that very essence of the Torah. And so much of civil law in America, and go right down to criminal law and all, is based on the Torah. It's the foundation. It's like what constitutes us as a people who believe in God-given rights, and these are our rights. Mm-hmm. It also are our God-given responsibilities. But we go from that, and with radical Islam, they want to replace all law with Sharia law, with this fictitious, this made-up law, which it took centuries to compile this, right. And Muhammad really didn't even touch this thing.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's very important that you mentioned that, because for what a lot of the Muslim reformers of today will point out is that Sharia law is man-made. Now, these are believing Muslims, but they'll say Sharia law is man-made. Why? Because Sharia law consists of the authoritative rulings of men, scholars from long ago. And so what they will say to you is, what, you think that God didn't give me a brain? Like, I can't question the scholars from long ago and their interpretations and their rulings about how I'm supposed to live my life now? And that's the breaking point, and that's really one of the central arguments that they have in saying we can ditch or modify Sharia law and look at our faith in a way that's more compatible with faith, peace, and harmony in a way that's productive for the entire world. But then you have that historical example of of how Islam has been and what the top clerics still preach today, which is that it is not a faith, it is a political doctrine. And that's really the dividing line between those that are on your side and then those that are more compatible with what we believe in a democracy and freedom and tolerance.
Well, before we get into the details of the faith in radical Islam, and let's go back to an operation that you're involved in. Clarion Project was involved in the undercover operation that happened down in New Mexico. Right. Because I think this will be illustrative of what you do and what the problem is.
Right, so this is the perfect microcosm of all the problems in one example, as well as enable you to understand what civilians can do instead of just outsourcing your responsibility as a citizen to the law enforcement and the government. So there was a prominent imam in New York who is really quite radical and respected throughout the Muslim American community, but his family members kind of went their own way into a more cultish direction, became an Islamic cult, essentially. And as they went off in their own direction, they became even more radicalized, and a woman entered the picture who they started referring to as Mary. They looked up in the sky, saw some miracles, and believed that they were part of the fulfillment of end times prophecy, which is a prevalent belief within the radical Islamic world. Everything's related to this apocalyptic battle that's about to explode. But this specific cult said that we were the main players in making it happen. And it culminates where the one member of the family kidnaps his own son from his wife, who doesn't agree with everything that's going on because the son is sick. He needs medicine to survive. The father says, it is against my faith to give him medicine. That means that I lack faith in God and Allah to provide it. And he's actually possessed by a demon. So what he needs to do is stop taking medication, go somewhere isolated, and I need to perform an Islamic exorcism on him. As a result, that young little boy died. But after that, and even before that, these little family members got together, bought some land, about 10 acres, in New Mexico near the Colorado border, and began preparing for this violent jihad that they believe happens at the end times that they are to trigger, which included teaching little kids how to shoot up schools, attacking hospitals, financial institutions, the military. And the big story that came out of this was how long the FBI delayed, knowing they were acquiring weapons, knowing that this missing kid was there. And ultimately, to make a long story short, a judge dropped charges, more charges were placed so that they did get locked up. But there were so many errors in the initial action and then afterwards in the prosecution that's when a lot of people said, what is wrong with how we're going about this problem?
Well, we're going to take a break for just a minute. I want to get back and actually see what you found there at that location, because this is something that's not too easy to cover up unless you are willingly ignorant, which much of the world is willingly ignorant to protect their own ideology. So we'll be back in just a minute. We're back with Ryan Mauro, the national security analyst for the Clarion Project. And Ryan, tell us, what did they find in New Mexico? Give us a little bit more of what we're dealing with there.
Well, they found the corpse of the poor little kid that didn't get his medicine and died during the Islamic exorcism.
He was actually an epileptic. That was the situation with it. And so they tried to perform an Islamic exorcism.
Right.
Which we kind of read about this in the book of Acts. It says there were Jewish sorcerers, the sons of Sceva, or Sheva, the 7 sons, who tried to cast out demons out of a man in the name of Yeshua, whom Paul preaches. And it turns out that the guy in which the demons were then attacked them, and they fled naked and wounded, just ripped their clothes off and all. And so we see that if you don't do it right, you end up with bad results. If you don't cast out demons, and it's not done according to the scripture. And so here we are, haphazardly, an exorcism like what was done on The Exorcist or whatever, and the child dies.
Right, and so the child dies, and the family tells the other children, well, don't worry, in a few months he's going to be resurrected, because that boy is the Islamic version of Jesus.
Oh my goodness.
And then the Mahdi, their messianic figure, is going to arrive, and we are going to wage that final jihad that you've heard about will happen at the end of times, and then all will be swell. So yes, you're dealing in poverty. Yes, you're hungry because there's no food, but this is because you are a special person to usher in the end times in this final jihad. And so this compound of about 10 acres in New Mexico starts arming up and training to do school shootings. They wanted the little boys to go in and shoot up schools. And they could tell.
And can I ask at this point how they know, or how the authorities know that this was what they're doing, or?
Right. Well, once the compound got raided, the boys told them. The boys told them, and they found documents about this, including ones that literally refer to the upcoming terrorist attacks, like using those words. Okay. So the evidence is, they found guns all over the place, the shooting range. It was a terrorist camp just like you find in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And as this was being built up, the FBI kept saying, well, we need more evidence to go in, and you need evidence of criminal activity. Most of this is not illegal. I mean, the boy's missing, but they didn't have proof that the boy was there. They didn't have a picture. And so they kept delaying and delaying. And then ultimately, it was the local authorities that said, we're going to go raid that terrorist training camp right there, because a text message was intercepted basically saying the kids were about to die from starvation. And they said, all right, we're going to go in if the federal government isn't going to do it.
FBI,
we feel there's enough evidence.
Turning a blind eye to it.
MIA at this point. Yeah. And the local authorities actually put out a Facebook announcement detailing all this, which is the first time I've ever seen that happen.
Okay.
And so just imagine your local police department attacking a terrorist training camp. I mean, those guys had to assume a lot of them were not going to come back and see their families ever again.
Yeah.
Somehow, and I've talked to people that were involved in that operation, they still don't quite understand how no one got hurt, no one died. Those people were there intent to die, and they were just able to take down the suspects, and nothing happened. So it was a bit of a miracle. And so you would think at that point the problem at least is somewhat solved.
Now, these children were trained, first of all, to do a school attack. So they're expecting to just go in and blow all the children in a school away, and then they would then repel the police and kill the police as necessary in the countermeasure.
Right. Well, according to those that lived at the compound, if the evil infidel police are coming at you, you still die a martyrdom. You have to defend yourself. It's your obligation as a jihadist. Mm-hmm. So you would have every expectation going into that camp that they're going to die there. And try to bring as many of you down with them. Right. And so basically this miracle happens, and they get arrested. The children are rescued and brought out of that environment. No casualties among the police. And you think it's solved. But then it goes to a judge, and the judge lets them out and says, until trial, lets the terrorists out.
These are adults?
Adults.
That are in charge of these children. One of them, which, is the father of this child that is found buried there.
Right.
With no admission on this. And so, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And so that's when my colleagues and I got involved, because we started talking to the local police, and they said, look, there's not information sharing going on. What do we even look for? Like, what is this? And so we started tracing how we thought they were getting the guns back to Georgia and to some other places, and listing out the fronts to show that this is not just an individual cult. There's a network. There's a strategy behind this. And so that assisted them in the investigation. But then you come up to this judge who was just absurd and said there wasn't enough evidence that they pose a direct threat to the community, so they can be let loose until trial. They just have to be on house arrest.
Okay, all right. You are planning to die in the name of Allah in the service, and now you're being let out. Now, what are you going to do as a terrorist? Analyze that. As a terrorist, you're let out on your own recognizance to come back to court sometime later. This is like a traffic ticket.
You're not going to show up to court.
Like a traffic ticket.
Right, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, you're not going to show up to court. You're going to try to escape, or more likely, you're going to try to carry out an attack while you have the opportunity, because what do you fear? Trying to carry out an attack, failing, and then going to jail for the rest of your life and not having your sin cleansed.
Don't want that.
Don't want that.
No.
So you better do it, and you better make sure you die doing it. So it was a tremendously dangerous situation. New charges were filed. Some of those charges also got dropped because of an issue with the scheduling of a preliminary hearing that the next judge said was not on time. And so then those charges get dropped. Make a long story short, there were enough charges that finally they all got locked up and they're not roaming around the community. But when you're dealing, how often do you even come across this amount of evidence in a counterterrorism case? It's rare. And so if this is getting messed up, you can't imagine what else is getting messed up in terms of surveillance, investigations, and prosecutions. And it's really disheartening to think about what the federal government has to deal with, and then how difficult it is to deal with it because of incompetence, restrictions due to political correctness, legal barriers. And so that's why we're stepping up to the plate to assist.
Well, I have to take another path right here because of the number of pastors in America that are locked up in prison. The number of pastors, of churches that the IRS went after and targeted them on trumped up charges and sent them to prison on it, yet known terrorists, people that are training children to go out and commit mass murder, these guys, it's like, who cares? We're going to let them out, but we're not going to let these pastors out.
It reminds me of the story when the IRS scandal happened, and there were a lot of people being audited, and because you don't want to talk about that type of thing because you're embarrassed, it wasn't until after the scandal happened that, particularly in New Jersey, I remember talking to multiple people that said, I'm part of a church or I was part of a political group, and I didn't want to talk about this, but when we did talk about it to other people, we're like, oh wait, you're audited? Oh yeah, so was I, and so was that guy over there. And so you have these abuses of power.
And this is actually admitted to by the Internal Revenue Service.
Right,
and
people got fired.
Yeah.
And so you can see the level of aggression in certain cases, and then you get a case like this where the ball is completely dropped. And so there's double standards, but there's all sorts of things like that you wouldn't think of when you think about counterterrorism policy that impact it in some very dangerous ways. I've been part of investigations where prosecutions have been dropped for unclear reasons because the group was very well politically connected and connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. I've seen that firsthand. I know of cases where counterterrorism training has been cleansed. I've been doing this since I was a teenager. So I have a lot of experience, even though I'm relatively young, in talking to people and learning about where these problems exist. And there are too many examples to go through.
Now, you mentioned you're fairly young, but you've gotten your education in terrorism in kind of a unique way.
Yeah, I'm legally blind in my right eye, so I couldn't play sports, could definitely not catch a football growing up. And so as a child, it was pretty rough that way because that's how kids socialize. But that blind eye is the best blessing I've ever had because that unlocked everything else that I'm doing. Because when you take that away, in my case, Then I got interested in research and reading and writing. And once I got my first computer, I became real OCD about studying a lot of this stuff. And so the way I had fun, sounds crazy, was studying the Middle East, studying KGB influence operations. All that was fun to me. And at that age, you remember everything. So that's how I spent my time. And then when I was 16, that's when I got my first part-time job working in a security company and dealing with the government, and been doing it ever since. And one of the things that I've done since then is I actually went to an online jihadist school. That was in English.
There we go.
So yeah, I figured what better way to learn the ideology than from the ideologues themselves. And so I enrolled in that and got to learn some of the tricks and see how even among their own audience, they would infer certain things but not say other things. And so that was also a fascinating experience. And so that's why I'm 32 now, but I've been able to kind of make my way around the different agencies and provide this information and help out as best as I can.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that the jihadist school did not give a diploma.
Oh, I have one.
Oh, you do?
I do. I have a certificate in Islamic studies. I also have a certificate as a new Muslim. So.
Well, there you go. That's a very, very unique.
Yeah.
So now what you're doing, explain a little bit more about the Clarion Project and where it's going at this point.
Sure. So now we have a greater focus on these type of operations where we assist law enforcement building up a database, because there's so many restrictions on intelligence gathering and what you can put into databases that when I train police across the country, I'll tell them about the radical mosque that's like down the street, and they'll be like, oh, I didn't even know that was there. Because the information is not shared on the federal level, in many cases not collected, because you can only collect based on evidence of criminal activity. It is not illegal to be a radical. It's also not illegal to get a gun. And so there's a very high standard for where there's situations where you may say out of common sense, I know that that's a problem, but if you cannot show clear evidence of criminal activity or criminal intent, it doesn't move forward. And so we collect a lot of that information and then we provide it to local law enforcement, and usually 90% of the people in the room have no clue what we're talking about. And we tell them this is all the stuff in your backyard, and it's very fulfilling. And the result of that is, and then we get more law enforcement contacts that then provide information to us. And so we put all of that together. The one group that I do a lot of real specialized research on is called FUQRA, F-U-Q-R-A. I set up a website just about our study of this one group called FUQRAfiles.com, F-U-Q-R-A files.com. And that's about the group that has these camps across the United States. And they're very apocalyptic, cultish, to the point where other jihadists say, these guys are crazy, we don't want anything to do with them. But they buy up plots of land, sometimes like 70 acres, put prison converts there, sometimes train on the camp or off the camp, and send guys over to Pakistan for more advanced training, and in some cases, even direct engagement in places like Kashmir.
Oh, that is incredible.
That's within the United States. And it happens because this group is not listed as a foreign terrorist organization. So I can provide a lot of this information about legal activity to the authorities, and they can't do much or anything at all because it's legal. But I, as a civilian, I have no restrictions. So.
Right. Now, you bring up an interesting point. Here in America, as American citizens, we have the right to keep and bear arms. This is absolutely essential. And in the county in which we are, the county sheriff of this very large metropolitan area has said that he wants every legal adult to be armed. And so, you know, this is something, when we know that there are problems out there, we do have that right. And so just as even those with maleficent intent against us, against America, they have the right to keep and bear arms. We just don't want to, if we've got the right and we don't exercise it, we really don't have the right. We're not doing what we can do, so.
Right, yeah, it's important for civilians to understand that you have a role in all of this. Whatever talents that you have can be applied to the national security and overall well-being of the country, whatever your talent or interest is. And if you are the type of person where you enjoy having a firearm and you're skilled with it, then as long as you're responsible with it, then you are contributing to the defense of the United States. But then the other side of that is when a jihadist does it, you can't prosecute them for it. And you also have to, again, show criminal intent or very clearly, or evidence of criminal activity. So you have a lot of cases where people on the no-fly list buy guns. Why? Because they're allowed to.
They're on the no-fly list because of what?
Because there'll be some evidence that does not rise to the level of prosecution, indicating that they have terrorist connections. May or may not be legal, probably legal, but it's enough of concern that they are in a specialized database. But that doesn't mean they can't go and buy a gun.
So that really is going to take an act of Congress because they're the ones that are supposed to be making laws, not the judges in our country. They're supposed to be making the laws that would fall into their lap then.
It would, but it becomes a very difficult conversation about, if you just pick out people on the no-fly list and you say, well, you no longer have the right to bear arms, but we're not prosecuting you for a crime, that then can be applied to other citizens. And so I understand the concern with that. And so there's a lot of vulnerabilities that come with having a secular democracy like ourselves, secular in the governmental sense, and we accept that risk as patriotic American citizens, and it's worth it, but there are dangers there, and that's what we're really focused on trying to counter, because if we, through our own operations, online and otherwise, can get that information that prevents someone from getting a gun because due to our evidence they rise to that level, then that changes things because the federal government may not have been able to acquire that information, but civilians oftentimes can.
Well, Ryan, I hate to say that old cliche. We just have just a little bit of time left. But one of the things that really got me interested and got us together is because you just got back from Saudi Arabia and Mount Sinai, and we're going to need more time to unpack that. But what can you tell us about this? Is this something that you've always believed? Did you go over as a skeptic? What happened on that?
Yeah, so this is one of the few things I got pretty obsessive with at a young age. I was probably 13 or 14. I just love this theory of Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia. Shortly after I became spiritual, because before that I believed in heaven because that was nice. And that was kind of the extent of my faith. And I went to church, and then I changed.
So you kind of grew up in a Christian home, but kind of a typical one. You showed up once in a while to church.
Never.
Oh, never. Okay.
Yeah,
well, that's more
church.
of a typical American Christian. Never show up to church. Okay.
Right. And many days I'd be an atheist or agnostic. I didn't know much about it. I liked heaven because heaven's nice. And that's about it, you know. And then I changed, and then I started getting into more of these topics, including the theory that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, because my mom gave me a book about it. And it's hard to explain what happened to me with this because I just kept reading it over and over again, even though I already knew the information. It was like something inside me just kept plugging away, saying, keep your mind on this, keep your mind on this. And so I eventually got the opportunity to go over there. I've gone over there 3 times. And it was a bit of a miracle that I got over there and safely and came back. But I didn't go over there intent on saying, I need to prove this is Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. For me, spiritually, it was more about that I had studied it and it was a part of my faith at a young age, and now things were coming full circle. And a big part of me expected to not be impressed once I got there. Once I got there, I'd be like, yeah, I kind of see all this, but it's not as powerful as I was told by those that had gone there previously. But it was.
Well,
it sure was.
Now, I've seen just a little bit of the snippet of the movie, the short half-hour motion picture that you did of this, and we're going to say that because we're going to put this on the air for people to see. But this is some compelling evidence that you came back with.
Yes, it's very stunning visually, and I hope that people will feel as if they had gone there, since it is dangerous to go, and the police do cover it up. But now I'm definitely convinced that it's the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia after having done a lot of research. But I didn't go there intent on proving it or even intent on making an online video to go out for free to the masses. I was going just because the opportunity was there and I really wanted to go. And to be honest with you, I didn't really want to merge what I currently do with counterterrorism with it. But then once I was there, there's no choice now. There's no choice now.
Right, and now how this is being marketed, because we've got some Saudi princes involved. They're talking about open this up to the public. You got in and out without a gun barrel being put to your head, which is rare. Very rare on this. And so I'm going to have you back. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, and then how this disinformation about this is being used by the radicals, the Muslim radicals, to keep this buried. So not only is the Christian church burying this, ladies and gentlemen, because it doesn't fit their Helena Sinai, Constantine's mommy picking out the wrong site, but they know it's the right site, but they want to turn it around to their own agenda and Sharia law for the whole world. So join us again next time. Ryan will be back with us next week for Shabbat Night Live. And I'd like to close with prayer. Yivarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha. Yair Yehovah panav elecha v'chuneka. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach Sar Shalom. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Yehovah make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace in the name of Yeshua, the Prince of Peace. Amen and amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Shavua Tov. Have a good week, and we'll see you back here next week for the continuation of the story at Mount Sinai.